source of life and cause of death. Water can wash away clues, dilute evidence, and conceal corpses. For investigators, water can be a cunning opponent. For criminals, a most accommodating ally. For the perfect crime, just add water. Brandon is the second largest city in Manitoba. It is located a little less than 3 hours drive from Winnipeg to the west on the Trans-Canada Highway. Despite its size, it has a small-town farming mentality. Everyone knows each other and news travels fast. The climate is very hot in the summer and very cold in the winter, but it's almost always dry and windy. There are few murders in Brandon, sometimes less than one per year. Usually, it's a knife fight gone bad. This is why the circumstances around Erin Chorney's murder had such a deep impact on the community. Water plays a key role, which will seal the fate of her murderer. April 27th, 2002. Debbie Chorney goes to the Brandon police station to report the disappearance of her 18-year-old daughter, Erin.
Erin initially was last seen by her mother on the evening of April 21st, 2002. She actually wasn't reported missing for several days afterwards. And that was simply because Erin had been known to disappear for a couple of days. When she was in party mode, she would stay with friends, wouldn't check in with family, so it wasn't all that unusual. After about 5 days of not having contact with their family, though, they of course became more concerned, and that was their initial report to police.
She liked the bar scene, liked the party scene. In that sense, probably a typical teenager, especially in a smaller community like Brandon, where your weekends are largely filled with that very sort of thing. But there was another side to Erin. There's the family Erin, you know, the Erin that cared very deeply about her two siblings, about her parents, her extended family. And like a lot of teenagers, she made some bad choices in life, bad choices in people she was dating or involved romantically with.
The investigation of Erin's disappearance is initially conducted by uniformed officers. They launch a national search. Inquiries are made at hospitals, rehabilitation centers, shelters. The police monitor transactions on her bank accounts. They meet Erin's relatives and friends, including her ex-boyfriend, Michael Bridges. He's a 20-year-old with a reputation as a womanizer.
When I think of Michael Bridges, I think of somebody who was full of himself, who had a big ego, who thought of himself as a real ladies' man, as a real fine, sort of a macho kind of guy. And it's funny because his physical appearance didn't back up that. I mean, he wasn't some big bodybuilder type, or there was nothing physically striking about Michael Bridges. I mean, he kind of looked like a bit of a bum.
The police soon discover that Michael Bridges has been named in an assault charge against Erin Chorney. He is not supposed to be in direct contact with her.
Unfortunately, and this isn't an uncommon thing that you see in volatile domestic relationships, a court order sometimes isn't worth the paper it's written on, especially when the party that it's meant to protect, in this case Erin Chorney, doesn't even want to abide by the conditions of it.
The investigation reveals that Erin and Michael have seen each other several times, including the night of her disappearance.
She spent Sunday at her mom's house and then had a family supper with mom and her younger sister. She received a phone call after supper and walked out the door saying that she was going to go have coffee with a friend. Wouldn't be gone long. Walked out of the apartment building, followed by her little sister, who saw her get into a car, and that was the last contact her family had with Erin.
The car that Erin climbs into belongs to Michael Bridges' mother. Michael's friend drives and acts as the intermediary for the phone calls. After 10 days, Erin is still not found. The missing person case is given to Constable Dallas Lockhart of the Criminal Investigation Unit. One of his first initiatives is to meet Michael Bridges to get a better idea of who he is.
No, initially, Mike Bridges was simply a person of interest in the investigation. We felt strongly that he likely had some knowledge of where Erin had gotten to. So I wanted to be a little more assertive in my conversation with him. So I actually asked him to attend to our headquarters station where I could have a little more control over the interview, had him in an actual interview room under our setting, and I video and audio taped our initial conversation.
Bridges does not deny having spent part of the evening with Erin.
He gave us a very peaceful, almost romantic narrative as to what happened at his home. And after that, he indicated that she said she was walking to a friend's place and walked out of his family home, never to be heard or seen again.
Although Lockhart is aware that Erin charged Bridges with assault, he decides not to question him about it.
The assault charge, interestingly enough, was resolved very quickly. The week that Erin went missing, Mike actually had a court appearance where he pled guilty to the assault charge and was sentenced to probation. It was certainly something that I kept in the forefront of my mind, knowing that there was violence involved in the relationship. I wanted to move forward in the investigation and not dwell a lot on what had happened in the past. Bridges' initial reaction to me when I met with him was actually fairly convincing. I asked him very early in the interview a very point-blank question as to whether he had any knowledge or involvement in Erin's disappearance. And if you look at the written down answers to kind of the script, it reads back very well. But when we looked at the video aspect of it, it would be what we called a very weak denial. The body language and the words didn't marry up.
Lockhart sends the video recording of Bridges' interview to an analyst at the RCMP D Division, their serious crime unit. The report confirms Lockhart's intuitions about Bridges' behavior.
Even though he didn't say anything about killing her or having any involvement, the police do say that he tipped his hand through his body language. He slipped a few times and spoke of Erin in the past tense, which they say somebody who didn't have direct knowledge that she was already dead would not have done. I mean, somebody you care about goes missing and you think she's still alive, you wouldn't be talking about her in the past tense, and he did.
Michael Bridges' Freudian slip sparks Lockhart's suspicion. Does Bridges know more than he is admitting? Dallas Lockhart contacts Bridges again to ask him to come in for the polygraph test. But Bridges declines. He claims that his lawyer advised him not to cooperate. This is the end of the cooperative attitude from Michael Bridges. He becomes progressively more withdrawn. 37 days after Erin Chorney's disappearance, the case is still officially a missing persons file. But unofficially, police are now considering other possibilities, including her death. Investigators organize a ground search starting from Michael Bridges' house into the surrounding areas.
To see how Michael Bridges was going to react, knowing that there was a group of people searching areas, and these were close by his home, to see what level of participation he was going to offer in terms of joining the searches. He did tell us that he loved Erin and would never do anything to hurt her. Yet when the time came, he didn't show up at any of the searches to assist the general public and the search groups. If you look at where the Bridges home was located, it's on, at that point in time, kind of on the southern outskirts of Brandon. And right out Mike's back door, across a small open field, was the Brandon Cemetery. So all those open areas were searched, both by our K-9 units, as well as by search groups with the Office of the Fire Commissioner.
Unfortunately, the ground search brings no result. The investigation stalls. Lockhart appeals for more resources from his superiors to continue the investigation. His request is approved, and Sergeant Doug Paulson becomes his partner. Together, they review all the information gathered to date. The only plausible explanation they can find for Erin Chorney's disappearance is foul play. They shift the investigation from a missing person to a homicide. They first get a warrant to search through the Bridges family vehicle. Will the forensic team find evidence that will lead Lockhart and Paulson to Erin Chorney's body? Will they finally establish what role Michael Bridges played in this mysterious disappearance? On the night of April 21st, 2002, 18-year-old Erin Chorney goes missing after a visit with her ex-boyfriend, Michael Bridges, in Brandon, Manitoba. Bridges remains the prime suspect, but without a crime scene or the body of the victim, the police cannot make any accusations or arrest. Erin Chorney's family do not give up hope of finding Erin alive. They attempt to maintain interest in her case through the media. Investigators Lockhart and Paulson decide on a new strategy for gathering evidence.
Looking at several possibilities as to what happened with Erin, if she had met with foul play, we suspected that it likely occurred in the Bridges home. We knew that Erin had been there. And the most likely scenario that we came up with at that point in time was that Mike used the family vehicle to transport the body. Given those reasons, combined with a lot of other factors from the investigation, led us to execute a search warrant on the family vehicle.
A covert search is carried out on the Bridges car. It is stolen and delivered to the forensic garage of the Brandon police.
I'll just preface any of this with the fact that because she was a girlfriend to him, this was presenting some problems for us. Even if we were going to find trace evidence, it was going to be a challenge at best to prove to what extent this had happened. But, obviously we're looking at areas in the vehicle. We concentrated on the back seat areas that you would put a body to transport. We used luminol. Plus, we were looking for hairs and fibers. We were taping. We were looking for fingerprints. Like, could we find her prints in the vehicle? We would take hemosticks, and they would react. So in other words, a hemastick is basically a piece of litmus paper that reacts with heme in the blood. So it gives us an indication that it's blood. We don't know whether it's human or animal. So we had a few areas in the vehicle that were like that. We swabbed them, and then obviously sent those swabs away to the lab. Focused in on the whole vehicle, including things like soil samples. If we found a burial site, that we would be able to link that back up, a similar type of soil, to get us back to where we were.
Meanwhile, the Bridges family reports the theft of their car to the police. Once the forensic inspection is complete, the car is supposedly found and returned to its owners, who don't suspect a thing. The results of the blood analysis come back inconclusive. If Erin's body has been transported in the car, there are no traces remaining.
Just in this particular case, it just matched to nothing. They were red herrings, if you will. So you were coming up with a hit, and it can react to copper as well, or cleaning solutions. So it may well have been something like that.
The obvious next step for Constable Lockhart and his team is a covert search of Michael Bridges' home. This opportunity arises in mid-July 2002. The circumstances of this search are not particularly easy. After remaining closed for several days under the scorching sun, the house is as hot as an oven. It exudes a soiled stench of cat litter. The police suffer from the heat. Another difficulty is that they must erase all traces of their presence. The team of technicians takes dozens of photographs of the house in order to put everything back in its place after the search.
We had areas in particular in the living room we got quite excited about when we first started examining that. It was a hide-a-bed, and there was actually a stain on the hide-a-bed that would coordinate with where someone may have been hit in the head and would have been lying approximately. You know, we're like, okay, this has got to be it, right? So we then examined areas in the bathroom again. We got minute hits in the bathroom. We found evidence of her being in the house, right? We found her ID that was hidden in a VCR case. We found a chain and we found bobby pins and stuff like that. But was that enough for evidence of foul play? Well, obviously not.
The VHS tape box containing some of Erin Chorney's personal effects intrigues Lockhart. Could this be some kind of trophy or souvenir?
I suppose it could be theorized that he kept them because he in fact did love her, and when they broke up as a result of the assault against her, he wanted something to remember her by.
But this box is not the only discovery that piques Lockhart's interest.
One of the things that still piques my curiosity when I think about it is when I was searching Michael's bedroom, I came across a letter addressed to him that was sent by his legal aid lawyer who was representing him for the assault charges. On the back of that legal aid letter were what I would call crib notes, which was a basic outline of the information he provided to me during that initial investigational interview that I had with him.
These notes raise some important questions for Dallas Lockhart. Were the notes written by Bridges in preparation for the interview with Lockhart? Or were they written after the interview so that he could remember what he told the police? Again, the results of this search do not give the police enough evidence to make an arrest. Michael Bridges spends most of his time locked in his house, keeping his contact with the outside world to a minimum.
One thing that we did learn about Mike Bridges is that when he was laying at home watching TV, a lot of what he watched was crime shows. He actually had a fairly good understanding of forensic techniques and investigational techniques.
Lockhart and Paulson continue the investigation, but they are running out of options. None of Erin's bank accounts have shown any activity for months. They are now looking for a body. Since Bridges' residence is next to the city cemetery, they focus their search there. They hire a private consultant that uses sonar technology to scan some graves that might contain more than one body.
We looked at graves that would have been potentially open in and around the time, like freshly open for burial, in and around the time that Erin went missing. Our mindset at the time was, okay, what graves would have been actually open, like ready for caskets to go in, and there was very few. You know, it wouldn't have been, it's a big graveyard, but very narrow window, less than half a dozen, and that's the ones we had the sonar look at them to see if there was anything unusual.
This search also fails to yield any clues, and the investigation becomes inactive. Nevertheless, Lockhart and Paulson try to keep Erin's case from going cold.
One of the things that we really tried to do was always keep this in the forethought of the public. We never wanted Erin to become just another missing person.
Several months later, an unexpected and intriguing turn of events revives the interest in the Erin Chorney case.
We did receive, I believe it was 4 letters in total, beginning in the fall of 2002 related to this investigation. I believe there was one left in a public area which was subsequently turned over to us, and one was addressed to the Chorney family, which was delivered to us, and then 2 more were mailed. And these letters were of quite a concern to us because they contained language which suggested that either the writer was involved or the writer was a close friend or associate or well known to a person who was involved. Well, aside from the obvious of reading and looking at the content of the letters, we also subjected every letter to forensic examination. So we had the paper checked for any fingerprints that were on it. We had the lick strip on the envelope and even on the stamp checked to see if there was any DNA evidence on those. We had handwriting analysis compared to, in this case, Michael Bridges, because at this point in time when we had the letters, he had been identified as a suspect in a homicide investigation.
Forensic analysis does not yield any results. Even the language used in the letters is both confusing and cryptic and does not draw a clear conclusion.
There was reference to perhaps Erin being buried somewhere, talk of water, that sort of thing.
Then Lockhart and Paulson devise a plan to move the investigation forward.
Sergeant Paulson and I discussed the possibility of using an undercover operation in this investigation. And we discussed the pros and cons of using this type of operation, how it would fit into this investigation.
It will take several months of preparations for the undercover operation to be in place. Considerable resources, worthy of a Hollywood production, are organized. Will it be enough to convince Michael Bridges to reveal the role he may have played in Erin Chorney's disappearance? For a year and a half, investigators in Brandon, Manitoba make every effort to find Erin Chorney, an 18-year-old girl who was seen for the last time in April 2002. The number one suspect is none other than Erin's former boyfriend, Michael Bridges. But the police don't have enough evidence to arrest him. As a last resort, they call upon the specialized services of the RCMP to develop a complex undercover operation. The goal is to get a confession from the suspected murderer. Undercover operations are highly classified procedures within police services. The details are kept confidential, a subject well known to crime reporter Mike McIntyre.
In fact, there was a time in Canada when publication bans were being issued on any particulars of the Mr. Big Sting. We could report on a trial, we could report on some of the basic evidence, but in terms of the intricacies of how they fooled or tricked or targeted their suspect, we had to keep those private. And there was actually a court battle launched by media. And the Supreme Court, I think rightfully so, said, look, there's got to be some accountability here. There's got to be some transparency.
The undercover operation begins with very thorough research about their target, Michael Bridges.
They had to get to know their target, and they sought to learn everything they could about this person. What made him tick? What did he like? What did he dislike? And they used that knowledge to actually form the basis. The first approach is such a pivotal part of this investigation. I mean, if you mess that up, then the stage is set for potential disaster. So you've got to, right from the get-go, get him on that hook.
To draw Michael Bridges into the operation, police send a canvasser to knock on his door. She tells him that if he takes a short survey for a radio station, all participants are automatically entered into a draw for a prize. In this case, a trip to attend a Calgary Flames hockey game.
Well, of course, the police knew that Michael Bridges was a big hockey fan, specifically a Calgary Flames fan. And that got him interested, the couple minutes it took to answer these few questions, and they had it all done professionally. They had official letterhead. They had a website that they had set up, thinking that if he is suspicious in the least and does any kind of checking on this, that he'll actually find that this is a legitimate company and a legitimate survey.
The police believe that the success of an undercover operation is its secrecy. It is essential that the suspect does not have any suspicions. Mike McIntyre noted that the ultimate irony in the case of Michael Bridges is that he had been warned.
Greg Brodsky, Michael Bridges' lawyer, had warned Bridges months before the Mr. Big started that they might try a Mr. Big sting operation on him, and he ought to be careful.
Sometime later, Bridges is informed that he is one of the winners. He travels to Calgary with another so-called winner, who is an undercover agent. During the trip, he gains Bridges' trust. The agent reveals to Bridges that he is part of a gang and that Mr. Big is interested in meeting him. Every encounter with Bridges is recorded and filmed. Behind the scenes, Lockhart and Paulson work closely with the Undercover team and a prosecutor to help research and guide the scenario for this operation as it unfolds.
They actually brought a Crown attorney into the investigation from the beginning to oversee all of the steps they were taking to make it sort of court-proof, if you will. So you had a veteran prosecutor who was seeing exactly how this was playing out. And obviously, if there were any missteps along the way that could be problematic, they would be raised.
The months go by, and finally, the undercover agent tells Michael Bridges that if he wants to be part of the gang, he must tell the truth about any of his illegal activities. A situation for which the prosecutor had prepared the operators.
And that prosecutor was hammering home to police during the sting operation. Do not make him think that he's got to confess to anything that he didn't do. Do not give him the impression that we just want to hear sort of a fishtail from him. Make it clear, and they did repeatedly. Make it clear that they don't care what he's done in his life. If he's done nothing, that's fine. But if he's committed some kind of crime or crimes, you got to be truthful with us. All we want is the truth. We don't want exaggeration.
The first confession occurs at the beginning of 2004, during a road trip between Winnipeg to Brandon.
He admitted that he ultimately was responsible for killing Erin. He painted himself almost as a victim of sorts, that Erin had been the one that flew into a rage that night.
Bridges also reveals that he has buried the body in the same cemetery that investigators had searched previously.
After Mike's first confession, we conducted a probe at the Brandon Cemetery because he did reveal during that confession that he had concealed Erin's body in an existing grave. One of the things that we then had to do was identify that specific grave and obtain judicial authority to actually conduct the probe.
Using sonar, investigators could not find any sign of the body because Bridges had used an older grave than the ones they examined. Lockhart and Paulson obtained a warrant to probe the grave identified by Bridges. They hoped to find some evidence that would validate his confession. Will the probe of the grave provide the police with the evidence they need, or will it prove that Bridges lied once again? The disappearance of a young woman in Brandon becomes a murder investigation. With no physical evidence, the Brandon police asked the RCMP to coordinate a sting operation 22 months after Erin Chorney's disappearance. Michael Bridges reveals his secret to an undercover operative he believes to be a gang member. To verify that Bridges has told the truth, the police are preparing to probe a grave in the Brandon Cemetery that might contain 2 bodies instead of 1. Since the sting operation is ongoing, it is essential to keep the probe concealed. Investigators work at night.
This happened in February. Out on the Canadian prairies in February, we're looking at frost going down in some cases almost 8 feet. So we were preparing to dig through ground which was similar to concrete, and yet do that in a surreptitious manner where not only the general public wouldn't know, but even employees of the cemetery wouldn't be aware of our activities. And one of the primary reasons for us to do it surreptitiously is that we, of course, didn't want Bridges to be aware that the information he had divulged to our operator was now in the hands of police and that we were acting on it.
We were given pretty explicit instructions about how far we could go. The judge was very explicit, shall not disturb the existing remains, which was respectful of the other families, right? So we wanted to be conscious of that. So we kind of knew the depth we had to dig at. We had equipment planned
After several hours and 3 attempts, the police find a piece of light-colored fabric. The cloth matches the description of the sheet that Bridges used to wrap Erin's body. With this discovery, the police hope to obtain a warrant to exhume the grave the following day. Bruce Klassen and his team need to reset the gravesite before they leave. They can't risk this discovery going public. Meanwhile, investigators still feel that Bridges might be holding back some details. They encourage him to rehearse, as if for a movie, so he is comfortable telling the truth when he meets Mr. Big. In a second confession, Bridges admits that Erin Chorney's death is not the result of an accident. He killed her deliberately, and he begins to give details about the circumstances of the crime. First, there is an argument between Erin and Michael. As the dispute heats up, Bridges loses control and chokes her with his arm. The blood flow to Erin's brain is stopped, and she collapses. Strangulation could explain why forensic technicians could not find a trace of blood in Michael Bridges' house or car. Investigators still feel they are missing a few pieces of the puzzle. They hope that Bridges will divulge more details when he has his long-awaited meeting with Mr. Big.
Bridges was so trusting of these people. He didn't even know what they were called, and he didn't ask. At no point in this entire investigation does he even say, "What's our name? Who are we?"
Michael Bridges' third and final confession comes on February 12, 2004. It takes place in a hotel room in Winnipeg. The room is wired with covert cameras. Under the pretext of calming his nerves while he waits for the meeting with Mr. Big, the operative suggests that Bridges rehearse what he will tell the boss one last time. This final confession is the most detailed of all. Bridges reveals his state of mind the night of the murder.
The initial assault had left her unconscious, but still alive. And so now he had to do something else. So now it went from a violent assault to a strangling. And he takes the time, and this would have taken a few minutes to get the hairdryer extension, to wrap it around her throat, and to seemingly choke the life out of her. But she still wouldn't die, at least in his eyes. She was still showing some signs of life, however faint. So then he makes the decision again, and he describes sort of a few moments of reflection in each stage where he's actually thinking, what do I got to do next? What do I have to do to kill her? So he fills the bathtub, and one can only imagine that would take a few minutes. The bathtub doesn't fill instantly. So he's filling the bathtub as she's in sort of the death throes, fighting, gasping for her final breaths. And when the bathtub is filled, in she goes. And he pins her down and holds her, and he describes doing so until such a point that there was no longer any gasps, any thrashing, any movement. He knows for certain now that she's gone. He obviously decides at that point that now he's into cover-up mode.
Michael Bridges meticulously cleans Erin's body and under her fingernails to remove any traces of his DNA. Then he leaves the body in the bathtub and goes to sleep for a few hours. The following day, Bridges looks for a way to get rid of Erin's body. He finds the solution at the cemetery near his house. He identifies a recently dug grave where the grass has not yet grown back. He digs a few feet into the grave. He places Erin's wrapped body just a few feet above the existing coffin and then refills the hole.
The level of clarity that it seems like he experienced in what began as a very chaotic moment. How somebody goes from that chaos to the sort of clear thinking to not only how to finish her off, but then how to ensure that it never comes back to him. Again, that's a level of deviance that I think really shocked people who followed this case. I think it became much easier for him to begin to now get into the more grisly details, the more sadistic details of what ultimately happened to Erin.
Following his rehearsal, Bridges expects to see Mr. Big, but instead, he has the surprise of his life. Several officers led by Sergeant Paulson storm the room and arrest Bridges for second-degree murder.
Michael Bridges looking like a deer caught in headlights when he realized that his whole world, everything he believed in, had just come crashing down on him. And the agent that he thought was his buddy, who was paving the way to this brand new terrific lifestyle, was actually an undercover cop.
After a frustrating 22-month investigation, police have to compile evidence for trial. They have to verify as much of Michael Bridges' confession as possible. The day after Bridges' arrest, forensic officers are back at the Brandon Cemetery. They prepare to exhume Erin Chorney's corpse.
We treated it like an archaeological dig. I mean, we sifted every piece of soil. So we went down layers at a time, documented, photographed, and sure enough, the body started to become visible, or the shroud that the body was covered in became visible.
The body had been wrapped in a plastic wrap, so it was fairly intact. There were some smaller bones from the foot, which had not been wrapped as carefully, and these were lying loose, and these were carefully collected. The body was exhumed and death was pronounced at that time on February the 13th, 2004 at 15:15 hours, 3:15 p.m.
The autopsy takes place at Winnipeg's Health Sciences Center.
You start taking things apart, and again, the blanket came off without too much difficulty. And then the plastic bags, you're taking them off one at a time, and you're labeling them, marking them. Where did you find it? On what part of the body did you find it? Right, left? You know, those kind of things. You're documenting all of that. And then the doctor himself starts to get into the actual cause of death.
The body is formally identified by comparing the corpse's teeth with Erin Chorney's dental records. Dr. Littman proceeds with a methodical examination of the body to identify the cause of death. But decomposition was so advanced that many techniques could not be used.
Bones that are broken will still be broken, and if a bullet fragment or a knife or some object is still present in the body, then that can be recovered. But in this case, there was evidence of pressure on the neck. There was the hyoid bone fracture and the bruising and the thyroid cartilage, so that was indicative to me that there had been some external compression of the neck. The lungs were in such a state that there certainly couldn't be any comment made as to whether or not the lungs were filled with water. Similarly, I couldn't say whether the stomach was filled with water. So at the time of the autopsy, the end of the autopsy, with the damage to the neck structures, I came to the conclusion that that was the cause of death.
The prosecution's case now includes 3 confessions from Michael Bridges, fully documented by hours of video and audio recordings. They also have sufficient physical evidence to corroborate Bridges' confession. Long before the undercover operation, Bridges acquired the services of one of the most famous criminal defense lawyers in Winnipeg, another indication for the police that perhaps Bridges' conscience was not clear. Will the defense find any flaws in the investigation conducted by Lockhart and Paulson? After nearly 2 years of investigation, Michael Bridges is charged with the murder of Erin Chorney. Confessions obtained by the police during an undercover operation revealed every detail of the murder. It starts with a domestic dispute between a young couple that turns violent. Bridges gets angry and strangles Chorney. To ensure that she is dead, he then fills the bathtub and holds her head underwater for 20 minutes. The following night, he wraps the body, drives it to the municipal cemetery, and buries it in a recently filled grave. The trial begins on June 14, 2005. Two key issues feed the exchanges between the defense counsel and the prosecutor. First, is the evidence obtained by the undercover operation admissible in court? Second, did Michael Bridges premeditate his crime?
I mean, at that point, the whodunit part of this case at trial was gone. Bridges wasn't going to be able to argue. He knew something only the killer would know, and that was the location of the body.
Bridges is charged with second-degree murder at the time of the arrest. However, with the increasing evidence of premeditation, the charge is upgraded to first-degree murder.
It was a fascinating point of law, the first-degree argument. It sort of debunked the myth that a murderous plan or plot had to be something that had been sort of well thought out, planned perhaps days or weeks in advance. By law, and as was argued successfully at this trial, a plan to murder can be formed in a matter of minutes. And that's exactly what happened here. The Crown successfully argued that Michael Bridges had sufficient time with Erin Chorney laying unconscious on his floor. He could have done one of two things. He could have tried to save her. He could have called an ambulance. He could have called police. He could have done something personally to save her. But in those few moments that he admits he sat there in silence, her life hanging in the balance, that's when he formed the plan to kill, the strangulation and the drowning and the cover-up. And even though it wasn't a great amount of time, by law, that was sufficient time to form a murderous plot, and clearly the jury accepted that.
At the end of the trial, Michael Bridges is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years. Bridges appeals, but it is dismissed in October 2006. This crime without witnesses, without a drop of blood, was almost perfect. And if Michael Bridges had been able to keep his secret, the police would have never been able to prove his involvement, despite the heavy presumptions against him.
Had he committed the perfect crime? Possibly. There's a good chance that this was never going to be discovered. Certainly, Erin's body, the chances of her body ever being uncovered were extremely remote. This isn't somebody who threw a body into a river that, weeks or months later might somehow surface. He had put Erin in a spot that nobody was going to ever find her. And for that reason, and the fact that he isolated himself and kept this secret, he probably had good reason to think he was going to get away with this. But at the end of the day, his quest for money, his quest to live a certain lifestyle that he felt he deserved, and his big fat mouth was what did him in.
This case highlights the advantages of an undercover operation, which in some circumstances is the only way to solve a case.
This is the one where it all came together, the perfect storm of a sting operation. Because unlike almost every other Mr. Big Sting that's ever been done in Canada, they weren't just looking for a killer. They were looking for a killer and the victim. And that's what made this one so unique.
In this case, water played a revealing role. When Michael Bridges chose to use water to complete his crime, he turned a domestic drama into premeditated murder. Bridges' cold-blooded action shocked the police, the community, and even the judge during his trial. But the memory of Erin Chorney lives on in the hearts of her family, friends, and everyone involved in bringing her death to justice.